ed ecco sentiamo la relazione del professor Muhlestein.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be with you today. Thank you for allowing us to be here. After 30 years of studying Antonio Lebolo, I'm deeply moved and honored to have been welcomed into the home he was born in by his descendants. And after 30 years of having Castellamonte be a part of me, I am grateful that Emilio and Castellamonte allowed me to be a part of you today. I want to try to describe two contexts that are important for our story. The first is understanding the papyri that were sent by Lebolo to Joseph Smith. And the second is their original context, having been owned by a priest in Thebes about 200 BC. As Dr. Bennett and others have so wonderfully described, they arrived in the United States in about 1833. At some point, a person named Michael Chandler was put in charge of showing them and eventually selling them. He eventually brought them to Joseph Smith in 1835. By then, the collection of 11 mummies was down to 4 mummies, 2 papyri rolls, and several papyri fragments. Joseph Smith purchased them and learned through inspiration that the papyrus would teach him about Abraham, the ancient patriarch. We do not know if the writings of Abraham were actually on the papyri or if the papyri opened Joseph Smith to inspiration to receive those ancient writings. What we do know is that he said that by revelation he received the writings of Abraham. As Dr. Bennett said, this has had a huge impact on the beliefs of members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. In particular, we've learned more about our life before we were born, where God knew us. To save time, we won't read all of the scriptures there. We also learn more about the purpose of our life on earth from these writings. We also learn more about the covenant God made with Abraham and how that affects our relationship with God and with our family. This is some of the context of Joseph Smith and of church members today. But what of the ancient origins of the papyri? We first have to learn what happened to the papyri after Joseph Smith was murdered. His widow sold them to a man named Abel Combs. He sold the 2 rolls of papyrus and 2 mummies to the St. Louis Museum. We don't know what happened to the other 2 mummies, but if you find them, please let me know. Most of this was sold to the St. Louis Museum, and the St. Louis Museum eventually sold it to the Chicago Museum, which unfortunately burned in the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. All of the mummies and papyri in that museum burned and were lost. What we didn't know for a very long time is that some fragments had been given to Abel Combs' housekeeper. She eventually sold them to her descendants sold them to the Metropolitan Museum of New York, who eventually returned it to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. With these fragments, we could learn a little bit about the ancient owners of these papyri. Most of the fragments belong to a copy of the Book of the Dead owned by a woman named Tasheret Min. 3 of the fragments belong to a man named Hor. You can see his name circled there. This was part of a funerary papyrus called the Book of Breathings. From this papyrus, we can learn all of Hor's titles and what he did as a priest. Thanks to Dr. John Gee. Where are you, Dr. Gee? Oh, back there. Let's give him a hand for this work.
Grazie al professor John Gee, che è qui in sala con noi.
Thanks to him and others, we know a great deal about Hor, the priest, including his grandfather and his grandsons for 7 generations. So both Hor and Tasheret Min served in Thebes as priest and enchantress in about 200 BC. So what does that tell us about the context of these ancient papyri? We'll just look at some of the things about Karnak so you can understand. They served in the temple of Karnak, and we want to understand a little bit about that temple. At the time, it was the largest temple complex in the world. It is still the 2nd largest temple complex in the world. It was the largest feature in Thebes. It had been a religious center for almost 2,000 years at that point, and a kind of political center in about 1550 BC. The Karnak temple was built up for over 2,000 years. Seti I and Ramses II in particular enlarged it. They built these 2 rooms. By the time Hor was a priest, these rooms were already over 1,000 years old. To give you a sense for how large these are, there are 54,000 square feet or 5,000 square meters in just this room, the hypostyle hall. There were 135 columns. The architraves on the top weighed about 70 tons. It's truly a magnificent structure. Just the temple to Amun is about 60 acres large. So what did Hor do there? There are several temples in the temple of Karnak, and Hor served in 3 of them. He served in the temple of Min, who massacres his enemies, and of Amun, Ra, king of the gods, and of Khonsu, who was powerful in Thebes. In these 2 temples, he engaged in a ritual we call the execration ritual. In this ritual, they destroyed pottery and figurines and papyri and other things that were aimed at destroying their enemies in order to keep them safe. Here we'll show you a picture from this propylon of the Montu temple at Karnak. And you can see that sometimes they even killed humans as part of these rituals. That's interesting because in the Book of Abraham, or the papyri that Hor owned, which is now depicted on the monument you have outside, there is a story of an attempt to kill Abraham, and he is protected. As a priest of Khonsu in this small temple, he would have done some different rituals. Khonsu here was associated with healing and protection from demons and creation. All of these are similar to what is in the Book of Abraham. As a final point of interest, we know that priests from Thebes at the time were collecting stories from Jewish religious characters. Then they used those stories in the rituals they performed and included them in, or elements of them in their funerary papyri. We do not know the exact connection between Hor, the priest in Thebes, and the Book of Abraham. We do not know exactly what the connection is, and we do not fully understand it, but we are continuing to research this. It is worth noting that Hor was interested in these things, and that 2,000 years later, Lebolo would acquire Hor's papyrus and send it to the United States, and they would end up with Joseph Smith. And Joseph Smith would be inspired to give us the Book of Abraham. The similarities between Hor's interests and the Book of Abraham are striking. More importantly, the doctrines that the Book of Abraham have given the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints are priceless. Thank you for your attention.
Grazie mille a Kerry Muhlestein.